All right, guys, if you've been following the channel for a while, you probably saw my video. It was just a few weeks ago, actually, about my Generac generator and how it decided to grenade itself one day. And I had a lot of activity on that, a lot of comments, great comments back and forth. It was awesome. And thank you guys for that. And if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in the description and you should go check it out and see why I got to where I am today. And if you were subscribed, you'd have seen that. So subscribe. So one of the most popular comments I got was, what did you do? What did you replace it with? Did you fix the engine? Did you get a new generator? What is it? And I just kept telling everybody, I went a different route. Probably a lot of you figured it out, but I decided to go with batteries and an inverter system. Let's dive into it. So back several years ago when I decided that I want to backup power in the house, and I went the same route that most people do, and I decided I want a backup generator. I've got propane at the house. We don't have natural gas here. And I'm going to have propane, and it's going to be tied in to automatically start whenever the power goes out. Pretty common setup. It worked. It did what I needed to do for a few years, and then it's an engine. It's mechanical. The thing decided it was going to die. So instead of dealing with engines, I said, what can I do instead? Here's an opportunity to replace this with something else that's a little more modern, a little more latest technology. So I dove in and did a pile of research on batteries and inverter system. So let's jump right into it. What I decided to do is I chose the EG4 system with the inverter, and I've got 10 kilowatt hours of lithium batteries. Um, that's going to spark some conversation, I'm sure. Happy to talk about it. There are so many different chemistries of lithium batteries. Some are not safe, some are very safe. The ones that you're buying that are called server rack batteries, that's what I have here. They're very safe. So first, let's dive into the batteries. What I've got here are a pair of 51 volt lithium EG4 batteries. Each one of these is 100 amp hours, and you can see right here, and 5100 watt hours. So there's 10 kilowatt hours at 200 amp hours of battery power sitting here. We'll get into what you can do with 10 kilowatt hours of battery power in just a few minutes. If you're not familiar with server rack batteries, these are lithium iron phosphate. So they're LiFePO4 batteries, if you want to look up the chemistry of what these are. A lot of people are using them in residence, in buildings. They're safe to use inside. To pair with those batteries, I went with a EG4 6000 XP. And so this is an off-grid inverter system. And I'll get into the details about what an off-grid inverter is. It's tied to the grid. I'm connected to the grid and it's bypassing through the grid, but we'll get into the details of what an off-grid inverter actually means. A 6000 XP is rated for 6,000 watts continuous power. This is a 240 volt inverter. So it intakes 240 volts from the grid and it outputs 240 volts to the house. You cannot run this on 120 volts. I've seen people try to put these in an RV and they work really great if you're using a 50 amp service at an RV pedestal. But for those of you that you do that, you know that you also might get 30 amps, and 30 amps only 120. And this inverter will not work on 120 volts only. It has to be 240. So there are some nuances to what you choose for your inverter system. For me, for this setup, this was perfect. 6000 XP, 6,000 watts. It'll surge up to, I think, like 8,000 watts. And it has everything. These are an all-in-one inverter. So it's tied to the internet. We're going to get into that in a little bit. It's got a 200 amp battery breaker connected right here. So the battery disconnect is integrated into it. You've got the load, a grid breaker, and so there's also a generator breaker that's labeled on here. This generator breaker on this particular inverter system is a multi-use circuit. And I'm going to tell you more about that also because I'm not using it as a generator input. I'm actually using it as an AC output. And it's really smart technology. It's pretty interesting. So we'll get into that shortly. This also has the battery or the solar panel disconnect is into this. So this one box is a solar controller, an inverter, a transfer switch, and a battery charger all in one unit. So it's doing everything. And in some other systems, you need a separate component for all of those things. but this is all integrated into this one box. Very cool. So from here, this is feeding over to two separate panels. I have my emergency necessity. I'll call this the necessities circuit panel. And this is the nice to have, but on backup power. And so the way this works is the load circuit that I was showing you on the inverter powers the essential loads. And this will run off the inverter until the batteries are depleted and it shuts off. The non-essential is another circuit that's actually, it's connected to the generator breaker, but in the software you can change it and tell it, I want this to be a smart load. And what a smart load does is it lets you power more circuits into your house, but at a certain battery percentage, it will disconnect it. Okay, so the real world application of this is I have tied into this a 24,000 BTU heat pump. All right, so normally when I'm running this, if the power goes out, or we can talk more about this also, I'm running on solar, it'll actually power that heat pump. But when my batteries get down to, say, 50% charge, maybe I'm in a long outage and I don't want to deplete it that fast because it's pulling 1,500 watts of power continuously. I can shed that load automatically when it gets to 50% battery, and this entire panel drops off. There are extra lights, outlets in the kitchen, convenience things. These are nice to have, but not need to have. This panel over here goes until the batteries die. This is running the well pump, refrigerator, essential circuits in the house. This is your critical load. This is your nice to have load. It's a really neat option that these EG4 inverters are able to do. Probably others can do it too. I'm just familiar with the EG4, so that's what we're talking about. So let's talk about how this flow works, just so I can paint the full picture of how this is working. This is my main breaker panel to the house. In here is a 50 amp breaker, and that 50 amp breaker comes over and feeds the inverter directly. That's the grid circuit. From here, it distributes it out in normal operation, like we are right now. We don't have a power outage and the sun isn't shining. We're not running off batteries. It's just bypassing. So it goes from the grid directly to the load and generator circuit, that's the smart circuit, and it's feeding power back to both of these panels, and those panels are feeding circuits in the house. If the power were to go out, the transfer switch that's in this is 10 milliseconds. It switches over, and it's immediately using the battery power to supply power to the inverter. It'll run the inverter and continue to power the circuits to these two panels. That'll instantly happen. The lights don't flicker, the TV doesn't go out, the internet doesn't drop, everything stays. You don't even know the power's happened. The only way you know is you get a text alert on your phone if you're set up connected to the internet. I get a push notification that says you had a grid failure. So when the power comes back on, this is going to say immediately, let's get battery power recharged as quickly as possible in case the power goes out again. So this has about a 5,000 watt battery charger built into it. So it's immediately going to start charging. We want those charged back up to 100% as quickly as possible, just in case the power goes out again. As soon as they get charged up, the charger drops off. It continues to just bypass power to the house, and life goes on as normal. So let's talk a little bit about why I chose an off-grid inverter and what that actually means. So an off-grid inverter simply means that it does not have the ability to grid sync, okay? So I'm tied to the grid, but I'm not synced to the grid. It's either pulling power from the grid or it's pulling power from the inverter. It can't do both. Why does this matter? Well, if I had a huge solar array here and I wanted to take power from solar and push it and backfeed it to the grid, this system can't do that. It's not designed to backfeed to the grid. I don't care about that specifically. Where we are, power's reasonably priced. I think we're less than 15 cents a kilowatt hour right now. I'm not going to invest $30,000 into a solar array to backfeed the grid because it just doesn't make financial sense to do that. What this does is this will bypass grid to the house in normal operation, and it's a standby power from when the power goes out. It's not to be used to supplement your bill. There's a caveat to that though. What we can do, and what I do, is I have some solar here. When I set this up, I did not intend to put solar, but it's an option. I had an opportunity to get some panels, so I have 1,600 watts of solar panels out back, and they're connected into this. So what this does is I can tell it that at certain times of the day, drop the grid and go to batteries, or I can tell it that I want to deplete the batteries down to 70%. That's a safe number. At 70%, stop and go back to the grid in case the power goes out. I want the rest of that 70% for a power outage. But when the sun comes out, it'll automatically start charging the batteries. I can tell it, don't charge the batteries off the grid above 70%. Only do that with solar. There are a million different ways you can configure it. I'm just telling you how I have it set up. I have it so that I can deplete the batteries to 70%. If the sun comes out and it starts charging them back up and it gets to 80%, it switches back over to batteries. And so typically on a sunny day around here, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun's out, it switches to batteries. This drops off the grid, and all these circuits are powered by solar and the batteries. And that's enough to run the heat pump continuously throughout the day. And usually I don't go back. Right now it's the end of February, so our sunlight here makes it so about 9:30 in the morning until 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're disconnected from the grid for these circuits, and everything's powered off solar. And then when the sun goes down, the charging slows, the batteries start depleting down to 70%. They hit 70, it goes back to the grid, and everything's just in standby again. So while I'm not backfeeding the grid, I am able to take advantage of the solar and not be buying from the grid during the day. It doesn't save a lot of money, but it does save a little bit. And it's also a way, so if the power goes out, I have a way to charge the batteries back up during the day. So another benefit to this being an off-grid inverter is I can have this connected the way it is because it's just pulling power from the grid as needed, and it's a transfer switch. So it's UL listed, it's perfectly legal, it's perfectly safe, but I don't need a net metering. I don't need any agreements with the power company. I'm just disconnecting from the power company to run solar. Whereas if I was net metering or pushing back, I'd need to have certifications, inspections from the power company, and I'd need to have a net metering agreement with them to allow them to buy the power back from me. And I don't have to get into any of that with this. This off-grid inverter doesn't require it. It's about another $1,000, I think, for the next inverter up that does allow to be grid tied and synced. And $1,000 is a lot of electricity that I'm just not going to make back anytime soon. So it's not for me. If you want to look more into these systems, there are several places online where you can look at this. I've worked directly with Signature Solar. I'm not sponsored by Signature Solar. If they want to sponsor me, that would be amazing because I really like those guys. I sized and built this myself just with information I'd got off the internet, but I did have some issues with it in the very beginning. So there were some problems with how the batteries were charging. And it really was, I think it was how the batteries were balancing. I'm not exactly sure what the problem was, but they would get down to like 30% and they'd shut off. They would be depleted. So it didn't really, the batteries didn't know what their state of charge was. I tried some firmware updates, but I ended up reaching out to Signature Solar. And since this particular one I do have connected to the internet, the Signature Solar guys can remote in when I allow them to, and they can work on this. So I put in a trouble ticket and I said, here's my problem. Remote management's enabled. This is who I am. And they got right in and they were working on the system, and I didn't need to do anything. They got in and they did some maintenance on the batteries and they did some recalibration and they took care of it for me. So I can't say enough about those guys. Signature Solar was awesome. And again, no affiliation with them other than I bought from them, but I've had really good luck with those guys. All right, so let's talk about what 10 kilowatt hours can actually do for you. So I told you originally I got 2 batteries. These batteries they're not terribly expensive, but they are not cheap. I can get the batteries are about $1,000 a piece. The inverter, let's talk about price while we're at it. The inverter also is, I think, around $1,400. So there's about $3,500 between the batteries and the inverter sitting here as this sits. And that gives me 10 kilowatt hours of power. Typically what I found in my house is if I'm at 100% power and I'm running the heat pump on a standard day, that'll run for about 3 to 4 hours before the batteries are down to about 60%. When it gets depleted down to that, it'll drop it off. From there, it'll continue running for about 7 more hours. So typically I can run the house for close to 12 hours just on the batteries. And several hours of that is running the unnecessary loads, the nice to have loads. But if I simply turn the heat pump off when the power goes out, I can extend that out quite a bit longer. So you can stretch 10 kilowatt hours out a while. So some of you might be asking or thinking to yourself, well, that's pretty short sighted. What happens if the power is out longer than 12 hours? And I totally get that. That is probably the biggest concern I have with this system. What if the power goes out longer than that? Well, where I am, I shouldn't say this. I'm going to knock on wood. But the power going out for more than 12 hours around here, I bet hasn't happened for 20 years. It's just very, very, very uncommon to have such a lengthy outage. However, if I did have that much of a lengthy outage like that, I can very easily disconnect this generator circuit, go into the software configuration and tell it that's a generator circuit. And then I can run a wire from here straight outside and I can plug in a portable standby generator or portable generator. My brother-in-law has one. I have friends that have them. I can get a generator pretty easily, even in a big outage. I can get something. And then you tell this in the software what size generator you have. So say I have a 5,000 watt generator. I can program this to say, I have 4,500 watts or whatever's safe. I have 4,500 watts available on a generator. Fire that up, and this will immediately take 4,500 watts in, and whatever it's not supplying to the house, it'll put it into the batteries. So it's pretty efficient, and might be a direction I go with that standby generator. If I fix that Generac, I could put it back out here. This has the ability to make a contact switch to start a generator. So it's built to actually plug into a standby generator. And what it would do is start the generator. When it comes online, it'll load it as much as you want for a load on it until the batteries are charged, and then it'll shut the generator back off, and then it's disconnected and sits there quiet for the next 12 hours again. So while it's not ideal if the power were to go out for 12 hours or longer, there is a solution for it. There are a couple of other options that EG4 has where you can just have a battery charging system that's relatively inexpensive to get that. And it's just a box. It'll just take random power in and charge your batteries with as much as you can supply to it. So there are a few options for recharging the batteries if you have a lengthy outage. That's why this isn't the system for everyone. If you're in a hurricane area and you have outages that typically last several days, this is not the backup power system for you, unless you have a generator that ties to it. If you do have a generator that ties to it, it's still fantastic because you can run this thing for 12 hours or more. I can add several more batteries to this and extend my runtime. It's just that each battery costs $1,000. So how much do you want? If I put 8 batteries here, I can quadruple my time. I can run for 2 days straight just off batteries. And then with a generator, you can charge those back up, shut it off. You can run for 2 more days. The inverter system, also, these inverters are designed and built to stack them. And so I can put another one beside it, and then I can have 12,000 watts of power. I can put another one beside it, and I can have 18,000 watts of power. The way the software works, if you have 3 of these, you can actually run these together with 3 of them and power a 3-phase system. So there are so many different configurations. It's very expandable and it's very customizable to fit your needs. So this setup here fits my needs. That's why I have it the way it is. 1,600 watts of solar is a little weak in the amount of solar that I have. I probably could use a few more panels and produce quite a bit more power, and then I could let my batteries deplete more during the day, and I can extend that window of how long I'm off the grid for, right? So instead of 9:30 to 3, if I had more solar, I could keep those batteries topped off to 100% later into the afternoon and then deplete them into the evening. If the payback is questionable, because it takes a long time to pay back on 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So I'm not necessarily done with this. It may get expanded into more batteries. I may do something with the standby generator here and integrate that. I think the problem with that is that here it would run so infrequently that it doesn't really make sense for me to have a dedicated standby generator here. If I fix that generator that I have, I might put it here. Then I can show you what the system would look like, how it works. Before we wrap this up, one other thing I want to talk about is safety. I mentioned this earlier. The batteries are very safe about this. There's no gas running into this. The power, while the voltage is 51 volts, it's pretty safe voltage I'm dealing with. I certainly would not want to dead short these batteries, but they have circuit breakers. They have battery management systems built into them. The batteries actually have internal fire suppression packets. So if there was a short in them and it detected a fire, they can put themselves out internally in the metal case. And there's an emergency power off switch outside. So if there were a situation in the house and this is powering the house, but say the fire department comes and they think the power is disconnected from the house, this is still going to power the house, like in a generator. The only difference is you're not going to hear this running, so nobody's going to know what's happening. So there's an emergency power off switch, and if you hit that button outside, it instantly shuts the inverter off and kills the power to the batteries and shuts everything off immediately. So it's just an extra level of protection for those that are the first responders or the fire crew that show up. If they think the power's out, we need to make sure the power's out. So I hope you like this and found it interesting. I'd love to have a conversation with you in the comments. I know that some of this stuff I heard from other comments in my last video about the batteries and their safety, and more than happy to have a conversation about that with you guys. Love to hear your thoughts, more questions. If you want to talk about doing this for yourself, I'm no expert on it, but I have done a fair amount of research. So again, happy to talk that through. Leave some comments for me below, and I'll see you in the next one.